Welcome back to Property Unlocked. I'm your host, Ella, and I'm here again with Joey. Today, we're diving into a very controversial topic that always stirs the pot, and that is if you should ever buy your family home. Literally, should you ever buy one or should you always invest? You know, we are very much biased to investment, but funnily enough, Joey and I both live in our own homes, right? Yep. So we're not renting.
Nope.
No, we're not, but we were renters once upon a time.
Yep. And personally, like from a financial perspective, short answer is if you live in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, basically any capital city, financially speaking, probably not owning your own occupier. And again, controversially, you and I actually do own the owner occupier. So I can see that it makes financial sense not owning one, yet we do the opposite.
But there is a specific reason for why we both live in our own homes, which we will touch on soon. But I want to tie us back to the original avatar we were working with in our first episode, which is I'm a 28-year-old, I'm a nurse, I live in Melbourne, and I have a 28-year-old partner. He's in construction. You know, we want to be property investors, but we also want to buy our first home. This is something I hear in almost every first session I have with a client. Everyone has the goal of owning a home.
Yeah, of course.
And there's so much emotion to that. You know, if you're going to settle down and have babies, you want to have your own nest.
Yep.
So is that something you see a lot as well with your clients?
It's one of the most common questions that we get outside of how do I go from 1 to 2 to 3. It's how do I buy my own occupier is probably the next question at the forefront of every single person's mind. And there is no simple answer, unfortunately, because there are some pros and cons. But like we mentioned, and we'll go into a little bit more around the numbers, financially speaking, it does kind of tie you down if you were to prioritize the owner-occupier before investing.
Yep. So in that initial episode, we talked about how to achieve passive income of $250K or $150K in today's dollar with 4 houses. But it was purely looking at investment.
Yep.
We didn't talk about buying a home. So today I want to talk about buying a home, when you would do that, how that fits in with our strategy, if it fits in at all. So I want to begin with using government grants, because the government will help you to buy your first home. They're not going to help you buy your first investment. So run me through what your thoughts are on taking advantage of government incentives.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge kind of free kick that's there on the table, and it's only available once to you. So I personally didn't take advantage of it. I bought it and just had it as an investment property and then missed out on the, I don't know what it was at the time, maybe $10,000 worth of stamp duty savings. But there are some really big incentives at play, and they can be in the order of, say, between $20,000 and maybe even up to $30,000, depending on the state that you live in. And it's a huge offering that's available to you. And what we see people do is take advantage of that and then potentially live in the property for a period. And then once it doesn't serve them anymore, or they've lived in there for maybe 24 months, for example, at least a year, not any advice that we're giving there, and then they'll transition that into an investment property. So at least they have taken advantage of that incentive.
Yeah, we have the new 5% deposit scheme, which everyone's been talking about. And I do love this scheme because it allows you to get into your property with only a 5% deposit, right? And if you're buying under the threshold for the state, you might even get a stamp duty concession. So that allows you to enter the market with a pretty small deposit, which is huge, because the hardest part is not getting a loan. The hardest part is actually saving a deposit. So I'll give you an example. I've got this client, I believe he's 28, and he has his own construction business, and he has used the first home buyer scheme to get himself into a property in Fawkner. So an $810,000 house, freestanding house, 600 square meter block of land. He is going to renovate it, so add value.
Beautiful.
He is going to build a granny flat. And he's set himself up for this by using first home government schemes, which is great. That's exactly how I would use that scheme. However, he is using it for an $800K house. If your budget for your first home is $550K, that does not buy you a solid asset in Melbourne. It buys you an apartment, okay? Or it buys you a solid asset in Bendigo, so you have to go and live in Bendigo. So if we want to be smart about this first property and your budget is $550, I would argue that I wouldn't even use the first home government scheme grants. I would simply buy it as an investment. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, because I mean, ultimately it comes down to making sure that we buy the best quality asset that we can. Not just to save $10,000 in stamp duty concessions or to get access to the 5% deposit scheme, like I'd probably rather pay lender's mortgage insurance and made sure that I got into the best quality asset that you can, because like we said, the transaction costs of getting in and out of property is way too expensive to get that wrong. We want to make sure that fundamentally the asset comes first, any benefits come second.
Perfect. I agree completely. So a good example for this is, let's say I'm the 28-year-old in Melbourne. I've got a budget of $550K. Well, I'm not going to buy an apartment in Hawthorne because that's not going to give me equity growth. Instead, I'm going to buy an investment property in Bendigo, a freestanding house on a good block of land, and I'm actually going to get growth on this $550K asset. Now, that brings me to my next point. When I go through cash flow spreadsheets with my clients, and we do the numbers on a first home versus an investment, there's one big thing weighing down that cash flow for the home. It's that you're not receiving any rental income.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Huge, right? So with respect to, and I'm just going to plug some numbers in, right? Some real nice round numbers coming back to that avatar that we mentioned in the last episode. Let's go for like $1 million owner-occupied property, assuming that they had 150 grand of cash, 10% deposit. You're using every dollar that you have, 10% deposit plus your stamp duty. That's basically all of your money gone. And then your repayments on that debt, we're kind of talking in the high 60s, like $68,000 worth of cash flow, negative cash flow per year that needs to come out of your pocket. And it has to come out of your after-tax income as well. No income coming through to support you from a tenant, and no tax deductions available on that debt because it's your owner-occupier.
Yeah. So in that instance, it does make more sense to buy the investment, rent it out, have a tenant, not pay off your mortgage completely, but they are helping with that rental
And
income.
you also get the negative gearing benefits if there is a shortfall because that's an investment property.
Yeah.
The interest is tax deductible, whereas if that was your owner-occupier, it wouldn't be. The other huge impact that people don't consider, coming back to this example, you came in and you bought your $1 million owner-occupier right now, that's going to keep you out of the game because your borrowing capacity was only 1.2. You don't have any income coming through from the property to boost your serviceability. So that's just pure debt. Your borrowing capacity is only 200 grand. What are you buying for $200,000 from an investment standpoint? Nothing. You're going to need to wait. You need to wait for your salaries to increase to a point where you can then start to get into a decent quality investment property. And you might be waiting, this avatar might be waiting for, say, 5 years post their owner-occupied property before they can get into their very first investment. And then when they do get into their very first investment, that's borrowing capacity maxed out again.
Yep. So in pretty much every scenario, you would recommend always investing first before you get into the owner-occupier.
If investing is your goal, then that's personally what I would do.
Yeah.
If it's, I just want to buy my own rock, well then do that, but understand that is probably going to keep you out of the game for a pretty substantial amount of time. And I wish there was a silver bullet to get around that, but unfortunately there isn't. And that's why we usually see kind of more and more people going down that rent vesting route at least early, and then potentially think about the transition towards owner-occupier later on down the journey.
How many investment properties would you recommend acquiring before you do get into the owner-occupier?
Me personally, what I did is I kind of started with my end goal in mind.
Yeah.
Figured out how many acquisitions I needed, what they roughly looked like, acquired them. And then the last property that I bought was a stepping stone into the eventual like my forever home.
Yeah.
So I bought all the investments that I needed. Then the last acquisition that I bought was an owner-occupier that I then used as a stepping stone to get into my now eventual owner-occupier. So to answer your question, all of the investments that I needed before I worried about the owner-occ.
Okay, well, tell me about the owner-occupier now. Is there any part of your owner-occupier that you think is a smart investment, or you feel like you've done the investing, now you can just enjoy a nice family?
Yeah, absolutely not. So I've just got the investment mindset, right? So even with my first owner-occupier, I got into it knowing that I wasn't going to stay there forever. Yeah. I saw it as a nice rundown shack in a good location that I could add value to by way of cosmetic renovation. Did that, lived in it for a period, had my first child in that home, and then sold that for the beautiful thing, that capital gains tax-free profit that I then used as the big deposit on my now forever home, which again, I didn't go and buy something nice, shiny, new and pretty. I bought something that was built 100 years ago, big land size, absolute dump, that I'm now in the process of coming towards the end of our renovation. So always looking for the value add play, even when it's the owner occupier.
Yes. Okay. And would you ever, for your first home, let's say you've done the investing, you're buying your first home now, would you ever buy something that's brand new, sparkling, beautiful to live in, or would you always go for the value add renovation property?
I would always go for the value add play because I don't want to pay a premium for an owner occupier. I'm just paying someone else's. I'm doing what the buyer of my property did for me. They gave me the big profit to allow me to move on to my next asset. I don't want to do that. I'd rather come in, buy the unpolished gem, and then go and add. You add your own flair to the property, and then you also add the most amount of value, keeping the most amount of gains for yourself rather than the person who you bought it from.
So when you bought your owner occupier home that needed renovation, did you live in it while renovating?
Yep. So lived in it for a period while renovating, and then as there were the kind of the more heavy works, moved out for a period and then moved back in once it was finished. Obviously, everyone has their own circumstances. If you can rely on family or friends, that's obviously going to be the most beneficial route. But obviously, plenty of people go down the avenue of say taking out like a 6-month lease on a property so they can go and rent while they're doing some of the heavy works.
Yep. And how long did you live in that property before flipping it?
So we lived in it for a period, renovated it, then lived in it for another period. So I'd say that was kind of maybe 2.5 year from start to finish. And then the property that we're currently in, we lived in, completely run down like that. I mean, it was habitable, but obviously wasn't what we wanted. So we lived in that for about 9 or so months. And then we're coming towards the end of that build and we intend on staying there for the long term.
Right. So it's all about investing first and then buying the owner.
And then even when we're buying the owner rock, it's still always with like an investment lens.
Yeah, okay, I hear you. Now, can we touch on the emotional side of it? Because we're very much investment focused, but what about the emotions? I know you've got a wife.
Yeah.
Tell me about your situation and why having a home is important to you guys.
Yeah, and that's part of the play, right? I didn't really care about it 10 years ago because I was single and just wanted to invest and buy acquisitions to get to a future passive income number. And then you come through and then you start to partner up and you talk about getting married and having kids and whatnot. And then once all that starts to come, it's just that emotional tie of knowing that you have permanent roots that are yours. You can add value. You can add your own flair. There's no risk of being evicted by a landlord to move elsewhere.
Inspections.
You don't have to worry about that. And the property manager saying, oh, I'm coming to do my routine inspection. There's none of that involved. And there's just nothing better personally from my emotional side of me than seeing like my son run around and kick the soccer ball in the backyard, knowing that that's always going to be his.
Yeah, love it. So one thing that is really underlying here is no matter what asset we buy, whether it's the investment or whether it's the home, it's still an investment grade asset.
And
always.
That's critically important because that if you were to buy that owner occupier, coming back to the whole still looking at it with an investment lens, that owner occupier hopefully one day, if you did go down that route, becomes an opportunity for equity extraction, for you to potentially continue the investing story. So you want to make sure that it is in a perfect location, we can add value to it, we can extract equity, and then we can still use it as a lever to continue our investing journey moving forward.
A lot of people have, I won't call it a mistake, but a lot of people have gone down the pathway of buying their home as their first property. What would you tell that person? Have they completely ruined their investment journey, or what is the solution for them?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, if you're happy there, then cool. But if you're not and you're open to potentially you could rent that property out, you could go and rent somewhere else, and then that all of a sudden you start to unlock borrowing capacity. Why? You've now got a tenant renting the property, you've got the tax deductions that are available, and then you can continue going and investing. Where we see people get unstuck is they then go from that property and then they want to go and take out another $1 million worth of debt to upgrade that and to keep up with the Joneses and then go and chase the next shiny object. So if you are in that position, it's not necessarily that you're done, because you do have other options in terms of perhaps renting that out, or like I just mentioned, using some hopeful equity that's available in that property to then look at the investing journey. But where we usually see people get unstuck is the fact that owner occupier usually consumes a large portion of their borrowing capacity.
Yep. I actually spoke to a woman yesterday. She's a physiotherapist in Melbourne. She bought her first home in Bondi Beach and she lived in it, and it's done so well from an equity growth point of view. And then she met her now husband, so she rented that out, and now she has that equity to go and extract, and she'll be buying an investment property. So as long as that property was a good investment grade asset. It's not going to hold you back. However, what would you tell someone who bought like a 1-bedroom apartment in the city as their first home?
That one there, obviously, you can come back and you could probably look at that historical data and see, and we've seen it in, unfortunately, many clients' cases where you look back and you're going, okay, you've held that property for 8 years and you've had like negative 2% growth. Well, for me, looking at that, you look at it and just go, it's the opportunity cost. And transparently, for a property that I had in my portfolio, there was a lemon in there. It wasn't like a 1-bedroom shiny unit in the middle of the city, but it was just something that was underperforming. And so for me, it was the opportunity cost of it's taking up X amount of dollars in my borrowing capacity. I'm going to free that up to then go and buy a better quality property, which I decided to do.
Yep. I hear you.
The other thing with the whole kind of rent vesting piece, and this is a really dramatic outlier in terms of the numbers, just to give the listeners a bit of a point of view, right? So this is a call I must have had maybe 2 months ago. Now, they were renting a property. They were paying, I think it was $1,000 a week. Now, I was in a pretty nice area, $1,000 per week. So we're talking about...
Bondi?
No, it wasn't quite Bondi. It was about 10, 15 minutes away.
Okay.
So we're talking about $1,000 a week, which is what, $4-ish thousand per month in terms of their rental payments.
Yep.
The property, a few doors down from them, sold, quite comparable to the property that they were living in, sold for $4 million.
Wow.
So for $4 million, assuming that you put down a 20% deposit, we're talking $800K deposit plus stamp duty. Who has a lazy $900,000 to $1 million just sitting there for the deposit? But let's say you did and you could afford that deposit and then you went and paid that. You're still paying the mortgage on the 80% lend, and the repayments was something like $16,500, $17,000 per month. It was like a 4 times multiplier to go out there and own that property and carry that debt when they could have just rented it for less than a quarter of the cost. And that's that whole rent vesting model, right? Instead of paying $17,000, if you could, pay $4,000, and with the $13,000 surplus per month, go and invest into, they would have probably had the capacity to go invest into these other 4 assets that we've just modeled in there off the bat there.
Yep, I hear you.
And they didn't have to stump up the deposit either.
Yeah, I'm glad that you touched on that, because a few comments that I get are, well, why would I rent vest? You know, I'm paying someone else's mortgage. I want to pay my own mortgage. You know, rent money is dead money. But in these scenarios, there are assets that you can rent for so much cheaper than the mortgage. It makes perfect sense to be a rent vestor. But then again, it completely depends on where you want to live, where you're working, where your family is. So you just have to weigh up whether you have that opportunity to rent vest and whether it makes perfect sense.
I know we've spoken about it a lot, the whole rent vesting thing. And like we said, I mean, you probably agree with me, financially speaking, it probably makes sense for most individuals.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
So, okay, currently, this was not part of my plan, guys. Last year, my partner, he went to an auction and he was talking to me the whole year about, oh, I'm so bored. I want a project. I want to renovate something. And I thought, okay, awesome, great, go find that. So he went to an auction, he bought the property, and expensive property, big renovation project, livable. We're living in it while it's being renovated.
Through it, yep.
But you know, it's nothing, it doesn't feel luxurious. Like, it's not like brand new bathrooms or anything like that. It's okay. Like, we're doing it. So we're living in our renovation project. We're not paying anyone rent. We're living in the renovation project. And the reason for this is because we have connections with trades. We can get trades done or renovations done for a good price. And therefore, it makes sense because this renovation project will be profitable. And that profit is capital gains tax free.
There you go.
So we can then take that profit and invest into other assets. So for us, living in a renovation project makes sense. Exact same for you.
Yep.
Would I have agreed to buy a home if it was a brand new townhouse in Port Melbourne? No, I wouldn't, because I know that those assets are underperforming. So that's our strategy. Paying a mortgage is not fun for a house. So I don't want to do this forever. I would much rather be rent vesting because my rent would be way cheaper than this mortgage. But, you know, it makes sense. And it's what my partner wants to do. That ties into the, you know, you have to consider what your partner wants. You've got a wife, you've got babies, you've got a family. I've got a partner who needs a project going on at any time. So,
but even still, right? You went into that owner occupier with the investing mindset, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
And that's the important thing. And I suppose that's something that we're getting out of here, that should an owner occupier live in your property portfolio? Maybe not. But even if it does, we always want to make sure that you're coming at it with there's something still to be had here at the end of the day. Like in your instance, it could be sold for a really nice profit. It could be an equity extraction play. You're always kind of coming at it from an investment lens. So even when we are talking about the emotional ties behind the owner occupier, there's always that underlying financial thing ticking in the back of our minds.
And I want to touch on it is a burden, having a mortgage. It does hold you back from investment. And my own investment goals, I would say, have been slower to reach because we have this renovation project where you have a mortgage, you have construction costs, you have trades that have to be paid. So, fingers crossed there's a great profit for us, but it has slowed down my investment side of things, which is okay. You have to give and take a little bit. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows living in a home.
Yeah, because they make out to be that it's always the case, and you'll always only ever see on social media the end product, right? And not the living through a bathroom with no tiles, for argument's sake, on the walls.
I remember when they knocked down one of our walls, the dust was everywhere. Like every nook and cranny of the house had dust. It took weeks to clean that out. It's not fun.
No, you won't see that on Ella's social reels.
You will. I'm trying to be transparent here.
No, but I mean, at the end of the day, obviously, it comes down to the individual. What do we want out of this? Understanding that there is going to be an opportunity cost that for yourself personally, like you just mentioned there, it's slowing down the investing journey. For most individuals, it consumes a lot of the borrowing capacity.
Absolutely.
So it's a case of, unfortunately, we can't have our cake and eat it too. Very rarely we can, but we just want to make sure that we're going into it with eyes wide open. Understand your numbers, understand your math. Run your math on what are my repayments going to be at, like an 80 or 90% lend versus what could I rent a comparable property for in that location. The other added benefits of going down that rent investment route are moving. So people people get bored, like I'm bored of this property, I want to move.
Yeah.
And then you got the selling fee, stamp duty to just keep moving and moving and moving. Whereas you want to up and move, sure, pay $5,000 and relocation costs and go and move somewhere else.
Yeah.
So there's plenty to be had within that rent investment space, but run your numbers, understand it, and go into it with a really clear mindset. And if it's something that you're going to go down, actually see it through for a period. Don't go, it's what I'm going to do, buy 2 investment properties and go, oh shit, I actually probably should have gone and bought the owner occupier, because again, you're probably not going to be able to from a borrowing capacity perspective. Yep. And then you might need to sell one of those great assets that you've gone and bought.
All those selling costs.
Correct.
Yeah. So I think it's very much sitting down with your partner or sitting down with yourself, understanding what you want out of life and out of your investment portfolio, and then making that decision. But one thing you said that stuck with me is that if you buy that home, it's going to take you 5 more years to get back into the investment market.
Yep.
That's a long time.
It is a long period. In the previous scenario, we were buying a property every 2 years, whereas now we've bought the owner occ and then we're just waiting game.
Let's talk about that scenario, because the 28-year-old and her 28-year-old partner, what budget did they have for this first home?
So they could have kind of pushed to a maximum of, say, $1 million based on a 10% deposit.
So that doesn't get you much in Melbourne or Sydney.
Nope, definitely not. So then you're kind of talking about, is it actually the property that you want to live in, or are you just buying it because that's all you can afford?
Yeah.
In which case, coming back to, again, I'd probably rather spend my money on a better quality investment elsewhere and renting where you wanted to live.
Yep, I agree. Awesome. Wow, that's just packed with a few home truths, hey?
I think so. And then look, these are just the hard truths, unfortunately.
Yep.
Not to say that you can't do it, because it can be done. We're both living testaments of you can actually have investments and have an owner occupier in the portfolio.
Yep.
But it is a hard slog. It does take time. I didn't get there overnight. I bought my first property over 10 years ago, and I'm almost in my forever home.
Yep.
So it's not like coming back. It's not like a get there tomorrow thing. This is a slow burn. Making the right steps in terms of the investment space should hopefully help unlock that potential owner occupier for you at a later stage, if that's something that you're even interested in.
Yep. I love how you've made it so clear. It's invest first and then treat yourself by buying the dream home. That's how it should be done if you have that investment lens.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joey, and I'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe and tune in for the next one.
See ya.